In the TIPBS podcast, you get great ideas and practical advice for educators. You can get more invaluable insights and free resources by subscribing to the TIPBS monthly newsletter. Visit www.tipbs.com and register your email address. Hello and welcome to the TIPBS podcast. I am your host, Dr. Kay Eyre. In this special episode, we share with you a teacher coaching call with one of the participants of the TIPBS program. The call follows a structured inquiry process that aims to work collaboratively with teachers to generate ideas for interventions and strategies. To protect the identity of the caller and the student, we have changed their names. If by chance you were to recognise the caller, we request that you please act with professional courtesy to protect the confidentiality of the information discussed. As always, I am joined in the call by my colleague, Dr. Govin Krishnamurthy, who facilitates the process. We hope you find this call interesting and useful.
Hi everyone and welcome to the TIPBS show. Today we're going to speak with a teacher. It's a consult call. We've got Esther on the line. Hi Esther, how are you going?
I'm doing well, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, we're great. As always, I've got Dr. Kay Eyre here with me. Okay.
Hey. Hello.
And I'm Dr. Govin Krishnamurthy. So Esther, we've had a bit of a chat just prior to the call. We're going to have a quick rundown just to understand your context a little bit, and we're going to try and have a discussion around some pre-existing positive behavior support kind of systems that you've got in place, and perhaps how the kind of trauma-informed PBS model can add value to that or be an adjunct to that. And give you some practical things that perhaps you can take away and perhaps try with some of the teachers you're supporting. But we might just start, Esther, did you want to tell us a little bit about your context and your role, perhaps, just to get started?
Sure. I am working in the context of community awareness and trauma-informed care, looking at a multi-tiered systems of support and how do we embed trauma-informed care within that system. The concept of trauma-informed care came after the multi-tiered systems of support initiative. So for some, it might feel like it's something different versus just how we do our multi-tiered systems of support.
Yeah. So Esther, just to clarify, so your role was about kind of going into schools to support teachers with behavior management and the multi-tiered system of support. Was that your role?
That was part of the role.
Yeah.
And supporting teachers who are doing that. I'm more of a support of the people who are going in to do that.
Right. So you sort of manage a team that then go into support the teachers, is that right?
Correct.
Yeah, right. Good,
yes.
That's correct. So you have a group of people under you who go and do that, and you sort of lead them in terms of the kind of approaches they use and how they think about supporting the teachers and that sort of thing. Yeah.
Yes, and the training they get, and yes.
Yeah, excellent. That sounds great. So just to get a bit of context, so was there like many schools that you're supporting at the moment? How many people have you got working for you at the moment, Esther?
We support 7 local districts and I don't know, roughly 40 schools.
Okay, right.
That not all of them are ready to do trauma-informed approaches, so I have 2 schools that are ready to do that, and the others we are encouraging to come along. Yeah.
That sounds good. So Kay, that sounds very similar to the roles you've sort of had. Did you have any questions for Esther at all?
I was just going to ask you, Esther, is it a given that the schools of the 40-odd schools in your region or district, are they all positive behaviour support schools?
They are in the process.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, okay. And I'm just thinking of putting this in context for perhaps people, especially in Brisbane, listening. Our metropolitan region behaviour team that did similarly to what your team does. They looked after 142 schools. So that's just to give people a bit of a context, which was a quite what we call a region. And our schools were from, I guess, 5-year-olds, from preppies, right through to our year 12s or our 18-year-olds, and they included special schools as well. Does your space include that range of ages and inclusion?
Our range goes a little younger. We start at 3. So from 3 to your 12th year at school.
Okay,
so,
yep.
Yes, and special education as well.
Okay, good. Okay, good. So it's very similar. Excellent.
Mm-hmm.
And so in terms of goal, Esther, I'd imagine that roughly the goals are to keep the kids at school, keep them supported, keep them learning, perhaps kind of reduce number of incidences of kind of behavioral difficulties and that type of thing. Is that roughly the kind of goals your staff are kind of working with?
Yes, keep students included, help students to learn how to self-regulate, help teachers to become more aware of how trauma informs or impacts learning. That's been a big one, that understanding the brain development of a child that's gone through trauma, and recognizing how that support might need to look different, and also reducing the rates of seclusion and restraint while increasing the rates of graduation.
Yeah, excellent. That's brilliant. So, Esther, did you want to tell us a little bit about just the frameworks and the models that your staff have kind of used? You talked about the multi-tiered levels of support. Did you just want to kind of talk to that a little bit and talk about what successes you've had and what challenges you're sort of facing at the moment?
Successes we've had are having people join to be able to work through the process of multi-tiered systems of support with fidelity within training. Being able to have teams to support those local districts and having local districts be collaborative in that process, utilizing special tools to gather data from the beginning of the process as we go through the process together. When it comes to academic data, reading scores, those types of things.
So having some measures of success and progress for the kids as well. And so what frameworks and models have you been using to try and support the children at the moment, Esther?
So the framework that we'd use is we 3 times a year or 4 times a year, we test all students. And then throughout the year, students who are not achieving at the level that's expected, there are interventions that we use for those students that release them where they are at least every 2nd week or 3rd week, to be able to monitor what type of intervention changes might need to be taking place. Is that what you're asking for?
Yeah, roughly. And it sounds like you have a positive behavior support framework, as well as it sounds like you're measuring things like their academic achievement, as well as their social emotional adjustment. Is that sort of roughly right?
Yes, that is, as well as attendance rates.
Attendance rates.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Excellent. And what about the challenges, Esther? What have you found kind of challenging, particularly in the context of kids who've experienced trauma, do you think?
Understanding the depth of the trauma. Some of the challenges, because those students can be very difficult. And so being able to understand that it's not a choice, but a strategy, of coping skill to be able to survive. And so helping teachers recognize that, and then providing enough support for teachers to be able to not have secondary trauma for them, and help them to be able to have self-care.
Yeah. So it's sounding as though, there's these sort of really kind of challenging kids, and something that Ken and I talk about when we talk about the multi-tier system is, often it's the kids in the red zone, right up the tippy top, that are kind of chewing up a lot of resources, a lot of time. They're also a source of a lot of frustration and, like you're saying, stress and sort of vicarious trauma as well. And it's almost, I don't know if you'd agree, but it's almost as though there's a lot of exasperation and a lot of frustration of just kind of standard strategies not working. And like you're saying, it seems to kind of need a fundamental shift in how teachers and education leaders actually think about this behavior as kind of coping and not necessarily deliberate misbehavior, which it sort of feels like at the moment.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And that is a shift, and it's I think we can do that well when we're not overly taxed with students. But once there feels like a tipping point for staff, that once they get to that spot, it doesn't really matter what type of trauma the child has gone through. We still expect some sort of different behavior. Or we expect the student to go into a more restrictive environment.
And that would lead to kind of more seclusion and restraint and things like that, I'd imagine.
For sure.
Yeah. Did you have anything you wanted to add to that, Kay?
Yeah, Esther, I was just going to ask you, in terms of sort of human resources, do teachers who have highly complex children, like we call our red zone children, is there opportunity or the human resources for them to have extra support in your system, or are they basically going it alone, doing the best they can?
Typically, we will have what we call a child study team, and that could be people like an occupational therapist, a social worker, a behavior specialist, the principal, reading specialist, if they think something's also happening academically.
Sure.
So those people will come into place. At times, if the behavior is severe enough, we'll also hire an assistant to help support that child within that environment, to keep the child safe, as well as the other staff.
Yeah, and does it have? I'm just thinking of our situation where we would say that the school can apply for what we call extra teacher assistant time from the region, and the region would give a small amount of money for the principal to have then a teacher assistant be with that child as much as they can. But we find that, rightly or wrongly, I guess, depending on whose perspective you're coming from, that it's quite a minimal amount, and the generalised feeling is, well, it's hardly worth the time and the effort because they're hardly ever available to me. So I just wondered if I'm just trying to get my head around what the level of extra support would look like for the average classroom teacher dealing with the red zone child.
Good question, and I think it's an individual within the red zone.
Yeah.
Some might have continuous ongoing support, and
Sure.
others it may be intermittent.
Right.
And
okay.
Our hope is always that they are utilizing data to make those decisions through their functional behavioral assessments and their so that's what we hope. Sometimes that's probably part of the challenge, is that we're not always the best data collectors as teachers. We're better teachers.
Yes.
So that becomes difficult.
Yeah, that sounds good. So Esther, so you spoke about a couple of schools coming on board in terms of adopting trauma-informed approaches. How have you approached that? What have you kind of put in place for them to be more trauma-informed at the moment?
Currently, we have been training about trauma and
Yeah.
talking about bringing forth the ACEs study, Adverse Childhood Experience study,
Yeah.
and being able to share that, as well as offering some strategies about self-regulation, being able to bring some of those concepts in. So really, we are at the trauma-informed awareness stage, and teachers are requesting more information so that they can help develop a plan for approach.
Yeah, yeah. And it sounds, so you mentioned a couple of things there, which I'll just explain. So the ACEs study, which is the Adverse Childhood Experiences study, so that's a bit of a landmark study in this kind of area, in that it tells us a lot about the impact of trauma, not just on not just on the child, but in fact across their lifespan, right from their birth, in terms of their brain development, into school age, into kind of those adolescent teenage years, all the kind of risk factors that kind of makes them vulnerable to. And one of the really kind of startling things about that is that we know that the life expectancies of children who've been maltreated are actually shorter if they don't have kind of sufficient protective factors, which is really an incredible thing that, a lot of people, it really opens people's eyes up to kind of the impact of these kind of events on a child's life. How have you found the teachers have responded to that, Esther?
That's been a positive response to that study and to understanding that information. It definitely has been the driving force behind what we've been doing. It's great research with the large study that they did it with the group. So that's been a great resource.
Okay, yeah. So let's just kind of buckle down to some details. So you're starting to talk there about some self-regulation strategies and things like that, and you're sort of, you've just gone through that trauma-aware kind of phase. What are your thoughts about what this might actually look like on the ground in the classrooms, Esther, in terms of how this might translate to kind of teacher practice or support?
When it looks like in the classroom would be to develop some clear systems about, we call it maybe even zones of regulation, but clear systems of how do we prepare students to learn. Teachers having knowledge of the body and understanding how to gear students up for learning, or how to help students calm down for learning, will be instrumental in how we approach this.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Yeah, and doing what I would call a hallway scan, a classroom scan for trauma-informed care of what that might look like. For example, we talk about students coming in from recess or coming in the morning, and then some students have this tendency, because they're to slam locker doors. So instead of having all the locker doors slam, we have close your locker with care. And we start to have students become more aware of what they're doing and intentional in their efforts.
No, that sounds like such a great start with all of that. So I wonder if perhaps I could talk you through, so this is sort of what I'm thinking. It sounds as though, you're at that stage where you're thinking about practical implementation, but at the same time, you've got an eye on kind of the whole school kind of approaches as well, in terms of you kind of chipping away at people coming on board and having a kind of whole school approach to this as well. And that's kind of where you're at. So I'm wondering if it's useful for us to talk about a model that kind of addresses both, but also references this idea of trauma-informed practice as well. So the model I sort of had in mind was, it was called levels of safety. So essentially with trauma, I think the first step with anything with trauma is, especially when we're thinking around, thinking functionally about behavior, is that you need to understand the impact of trauma, which is the trauma-aware stuff that you're doing. The very next step is starting to think about safety. And by safety, I mean not just physical safety, but emotional safety of the kids. And you think about safety in a few different levels, because like you're saying, things got to be safe for the child, but it's also got to be safe for the teachers, because as you may have experienced, and I don't know if it's come to this for you, but sometimes the kids can be really unsafe around teachers, and that teachers can feel unsafe as well.
Sure.
So it's about kind of having everyone safe and thinking about it at different levels. So the very bottom level is this idea, and Esther, I think you're probably doing things along each of these levels, but it might help to kind of structure thinking or give some framework around which you kind of plan some of your interventions. So right down the bottom is what we call safety, individual safety, but not just, like I said, physical safety, but emotional safety. And one of the things we really think about, help teachers think about, is for a traumatized child, what would seem threatening in a classroom? So with a lot of other children who've had kind of relatively safe kind of upbringings, there might be some things that are, that feel unsafe for them, might seem stressful for them, but wouldn't necessarily seem really, really unsafe. So the really classic one might be about how the teacher gives feedback. So, a teacher might kind of be allowed to raise a voice a little bit, or kind of really push a certain student on when delivering kind of negative feedback. But for a traumatized child, that might feel really threatening, really, rejecting. It might feel like sort of abandonment for some reason. And so it doesn't necessarily feel safe. And so they're much more anxious about making mistakes with the teacher. So, I'm sure you're aware of those ideas around growth mindset and all that. For traumatized children, they need a lot more safety and scaffolding around that. So really being aware of some of their triggers, and really you understand a lot of those triggers from thinking about the child's past, thinking about what they perhaps have been through, but also really attending and tuning into their emotional state at different times in the day, and really making sense of times when they've kind of really had meltdowns, about hypothesizing about what that could have been about and what you can kind of do to help them with that. And it's really for traumatized kids, and there's so much that can be said about emotional safety, but it's really giving them some sense of mastery over their own feelings, and both good and bad, and that can look like various different things. That can look like social emotional skills, but it also needs to start from a place where you're tuned in to when to their levels of arousal, so that you can catch them before they kind of really escalate and kind of dive off into the deep end of being really distressed, that you can catch that sooner rather than later. So to use like a PBIS kind of metaphor, that, and I think Kay talks to this a lot, a red zone child isn't a red zone child in every single class. They're often a green zone child in some classes. There may be a yellow zone out in the playground. So really kind of tuning in for how they function in environments, and being tuned into their kind of levels of arousal is often kind of the key with the emotional safety. Kay, did you want to add anything to that emotional safety level?
No, I don't think so. Not at the moment.
Esther, what were your thoughts just hearing some of that?
I think that's the perfect concept with that little, if you're thinking of the triangle, the tier one of keeping the students at an emotional safety level at all times, regardless of the environment that they are operating in. And I think the small thing of teacher feedback can be a big trigger that teachers aren't even aware of through their response. And students who have experienced trauma are usually hypersensitive to negative feedback, and typically do not have the coping or the response mechanism to manage that. So simply a teacher gives feedback on a paper and the student rips up the paper.
That's right.
Is the large response to what we would consider a small kind of correction.
And Esther, you know how you were saying before how rightly or wrongly teachers like to have a little written written document that tells them exactly what they need to do, a little bit like their little cookbook. I think that listening to Govind work through that again, and you saying that that was a really important sort of tool that you wanted to develop, I think that in all of our experiences, when you actually think of something that's really a really common trigger, that feedback is one, that I think that would be the perfect strategy for a teacher to sort of hang their understanding and develop their awareness to be able to, you know, do that strategy well.
Yes.
And with that trauma of, you know, even if it was just his one strategy we're going to work on through our trauma awareness classes, I think that would, given what we know about children with trauma, would be a really good way in of buying their, you know, their faith in the whole trauma-informed practice as it being an integral part of what they do, and not an add-on, because that sort of stuff happens in Tier 1 all the time.
Right.
Doesn't it? Like, I mean, it's just what we do. It's like you said about the hallway, all of those proactive and preventative routines, and it's just a matter of getting them to practice routines that happen to be trauma-informed, so that we can then say, oh, look at that, you're doing that anyway, you see, you already know this stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think that feedback one would be a really critical place to start, actually.
And that segues quite nicely into that second level, which is what we call relational safety. So, you know, the way we sort of explain this is most students come into class and, you know, they sort of trust that the teacher isn't there to hurt them, and that they're there to try to teach them and help them and that type of thing. And so when we think about what the experience of a traumatized child is that their experience of grown-ups has been pretty negative. So instead of coming in assuming good, they're coming in assuming bad, that they're coming in assuming that they're going to shame you, humiliate you, because, you know, that's been the experience of adults. That's kind of might have been even been the experience of teachers, you know, people who aren't necessarily there to be supportive, but someone who makes them feel stupid in front of their friends or whatever it is. So really what we talk a lot about is often what traumatized kids have, well, several traumatized kids have trouble with, is being able to trust people, being able to feel safe in relationships, being able to have a sense that people are there to help them and not kind of hurt them. And so while for other students, you don't necessarily need to do a lot of that positive reinforcement as much, for traumatized kids, it is about hanging in there. But it's also being able to hang in there while they're rejecting you or pushing you away, kind of experiences that you might never have with other children. So helping them feel safe with the teacher, but helping them feel safe with their peers as well. Because lots of these kids just don't know how to play, how to share, how to have empathy, how to resolve conflict. So there needs to be some level of structure and supervision and scaffolding around that. So relational safety is a really huge second part of that. And it's sort of the foundations for the child's kind of experience of school, really.
And see, that fits in perfectly well to that Tier 2, small group socialisation, focus on social emotional learning, and the stuff like Esther was saying that we already do. It's just a matter of taking, well, exactly that, and just overlaying that focus of trauma-informed practice, which will benefit anybody, trauma with trauma or without trauma. So, yeah.
And Esther, you might have an experience of this. I know certainly Kay and I, when we've done these calls, often the temptation is with kids who have experienced trauma and sitting in the red zone, is that somehow people just discount whole school approaches with them, that they think, oh, they need some sort of special intervention, we've got to do this special, you know, and that none of that stuff applies to them. But that's not true at all. I think it's about using those kind of school-wide approaches, but using it thoughtfully with these kids, using it in a scaffolded way, using it in a way that is meaningful to them is what's actually quite useful and powerful, really, because they don't get a sense of being treated differently, and that it kind of builds on that relational safety as well with them. Did you have any thoughts about that relational safety idea, Esther?
I think that's the great idea, and I see that as part of that tier 2.
Yep.
And it's a skill that we have to teach. So that's I see why that is being important in tier 2 of recognizing those trauma children. That's not going to become a skill that just develops naturally within them due to the trauma and the lack of trusting relationships.
That's right. And they're watching all the time, just as kids do. So, how adults relate to, the adults in the environment relate to each other, or how the adults kind of speak to children. You're constantly modeling that too. And that's something we talk about with teachers as well, that, if you're going to scream and yell, and we all do when we're stressed and we're pushed in a corner and we're really kind of,
yes.
trying our best. But I think all of that kind of models to the kids as well about how we resolve conflicts and how we deal with stress, really. And so the third level is what we call environmental safety, which is essentially how safe the kids feel in the classroom environment. So that's both space and time. So space in terms of just really practical things like, does the child want to be kind of closer to the teacher so they don't feel ashamed about asking for help, or do they need to feel as though they're closer to the, the door because they feel kind of trapped or cornered or whatever it is? Is there a place within the classroom they can retreat to when it's all becoming too much? Is there are there predictable rules within the classroom about things being fair and ways in which people can ask for help and get help? And so a lot of that environmental time, and in terms of time, it becomes about predictable routines with an eye on transition. So we talk a lot about rituals around transitions. And the thing about environmental safety too is, giving the kids what they need in their environment that they need to learn. So, things like, we're big advocates for kids getting breakfast. We're big advocates for kids having little naps if they need it with rules around it. So giving them what they need to be able to learn is critical. Kay, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, well, I guess, again, that fits perfectly into tier 1, really, because they're all preventative and proactive sort of whole school approaches that we can do, and predictable routines.
Yeah.
I think anybody who's been PBS'd, as we call it, or has been, seen the triangle, been triangled to death. Yeah, that's right. Whichever RTI triangle or some triangle, we've been triangled to death. The first thing they'll say is rules and routines, or behaviour expectations and routines. So again, I think that these 3 levels of safety is really sort of a ticket to teacher buy-in, because you can, both of those types of safety, you're already doing most of this, but we just need to tweak it so it's more trauma aware, and but it's already there. It's just a matter of thinking of it just a little bit differently, like we would set up our space with routines, predictable transitions, but we may not think about the fact that if we moved the child closer to us because we thought they needed closer supervision, that was going to exacerbate their behaviour because they need to feel safer because they're near the opening of the door. Just those little things that we naturally do as teachers for the whole group, because we don't have that trauma awareness. But when we do, I think I always explain it to my pre-service teachers in special ed that if we plan as if everybody in our classroom has special needs, then it's going to benefit everybody. Absolutely. But we start with the special need and then we work outwards. And I think if we start with the trauma...
Going there, Esther, can you still hear me?
I can, yes.
Yep. So if we start with the trauma-informed and aware perspective and plan from that point on, I think then clearly it benefits the child without trauma, but we have the child with trauma foremost in our mind in the planning. So I think that environmental safety fits in it, just perfectly.
perfect. I do too.
Mm.
Yes. One of the things that I have tried to do with our new schools is to offer them just a checklist, to an environmental checklist, to look at how they are, to kind of guide the thinking, especially our schools that are already participating in PBIS. There's because they are doing so many things that it supports what they're doing, as well as encourages some of that cognitive shift of how we can also look at things.
Sorry, I'm back. Had a bit of trouble with the internet. So, Kay, you're still with us?
Yes. I'm
Yep.
still here. We're both
Great.
here.
All right, sorry about that. So that was environmental safety, and I'll just finish. The last level of safety is what we call systemic safety. And this sort of idea is kind of talking about this idea of things being safe across the school community and across the school system.
Sure.
Like I was saying before, there's this sort of idea that, trauma travels, as we say. So, scared children become scary children,
Right.
and frightened teachers become frightening, and stressed out administrators become angry and punitive when they have all three to kind of manage. So what we sort of talk about is having systems in place that's supportive of the teacher themselves when trying to do this. And one of the things we say, and this is a PBS thing too, that you don't have to be alone managing these kids. There has to be systems in place where people can support you in those really crisis times, but there are people who can support you in being able to reflect on your practice, be able to support you in getting feedback on how you're kind of managing this child, being able to support you from other kind of professions and disciplines as well, and that is laid down in kind of really set dates in which you kind of touch base again, review your data, review your strategies, and be able to debrief about things. Because if you're doing these strategies with that system in place, which is really like a kind of school-wide system, you don't have buy-in from different levels of teachers in the school. You don't have the freedom to be able to take some risks with the support of your school administrator in trying to be inclusive with these kids. So that's sort of the systemic level systems kind of safety. What has your experience been of that, Esther, in your kind of context?
Looking at systemic systems of safety, that is the direction that we're going to be able to support teachers and staff, because I agree with you. Yes, scared teachers become scary teachers. And we agree with that. And part of what I think, maybe you're offline when I shared this with Kay.
Sorry.
That's okay. Looking at our systems, as some of our districts have already implemented PBIS systems. So then I have given them a kind of a environmental scan checklist to start to talk about. They're already doing many great things. Is there a component of trauma-informed care that we also could put in place? Being able to talk to building leaders about how we support staff so they don't occur, or if we can mitigate some of that secondary trauma. That's important. But it has to start with the system. We can't impose this on a classroom and think that that's going to work. It has to be a systems-wide approach from everybody. Custodians to cooks to administration. It has to be a systems approach.
Yeah, absolutely. And what's nice about the systems approach too is that, when we're thinking about that second level, the relational safety, is sometimes you hit this point where there's just been, there's these coercive cycles of interaction between the teacher and the students, and sometimes it feels like it's gone too far. And which is when you can think more broadly about relationships within the school community as well. Can they spend an afternoon with the lunch lady? Can they be out? And, if it's going to keep them at school and if it's going to help them feel regulated, can we think more broadly about those things? And can we have like a safety net of relationships so that even if things are really frightening at home, that, school can be a source of safety and kind of comfort in some way for these kids. Because often I think the temptation is with some of these kids with really complex behaviors, and really you're working off of kind of hypotheses about why these behaviors are happening, is that there's this, I call it the irresistible invitation to be able to kind of throw your hands up in the air and say, there's just way too much we can't control here. This child just cannot be part of the school. But
Right.
really, I think it's not just, when having that systems approach, it's not just looking within the school, it's actually looking outside the school as well, being able to work with other professionals who are involved in the child's life, and being an active member in that wraparound approach. Because, I always say, the teacher is probably one of those adults who spends a lot of time with the child, just almost as much as the carer or whoever is, taking care of the child. And so they're a very, very important person to be on, at the table having conversations about the child. So having that kind of wraparound kind of headset really important, which I'd imagine some of your staff do as well. Would they, Esther?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Having those team meetings about that.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's standard procedure, quite honestly, before we start to look at moving students or changing types of programming for kids. It's standard procedure.
So Esther, we've talked about those 4 levels of safety. Now, you sound like you've got a lot of experience with kind of working with schools around this. If you were to imagine talking to a school, a brand new school, about using this model to explain the trauma-informed approach, what do you think the responses would be? Where do you think would be the sticking points in terms of them saying, no, but not quite, or what not? What do you think the objections would be, do you think?
Talking to a new school, if we typically, in my experience, objections come from lack of understanding of how this could support their work.
Yeah.
So talking to the new school, I would want to be able to connect what we are suggesting to what they already currently have in place, to be able to support. As we know, educators have a lot on their plate. And oftentimes are mandated to do things that do not follow the dollar, or the support comes later. So being able to, teachers are caring, compassionate people. They want the best for kids. The frustration or the rub comes when they can't solve the problem. So this is a solution. And if we can help them to understand this is a solution to a great deal of those problems, they will buy in, because they are solution focused.
It's about kind of explaining it to them without it sounding like more work, really.
It cannot be more work.
It's about kind of explaining it in a way. And I know Kay has a really nice way of explaining it. If you're going to spend 80% of your time with your red zone child, let's be smart about how you spend that 80%.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. Because they're taking up that much time now. So, and that's again, like you said before, Esther, and that's about, I think, balancing that. Making them aware that they're already doing a great deal. And like you've said, because they are such caring individuals, it's about showing them that you're caring for them at the same time, because that's when they physically and emotionally become so over it that until you, like you said before, until you can get them, it's a bit like the child with trauma, until you can get the teacher to trust in what you're saying and this 1 or 2 strategies, they really, haven't got the energy most of the time, or the patience left to give it as much as they would like to, because it's just like, I'm here to care and make a difference, and it's not happening, and I'm just so disenfranchised with the whole core of what I'm here for not happening that I just, convince me
Yes,
Yeah.
convince me how.
Convince me 150 times over, because it's very difficult. I used to say to my behaviour team, well, it's not best practice to go and rescue the teacher. Of course, I used to say to my behaviour team that teachers that were dealing with red zone kids on a day after day basis, with no respite sort of thing, we needed to rescue them. Whether it was against everything that we believed, we needed to rescue them at the beginning enough to build their trust and their confidence, and then teach them skills, and then, ease off, with the complete rescue and just ease them back, but we would be, spending so much time that was ineffective because our, the way we worked and what we believed was, no, you don't rescue, you make sure that the teacher does this, and this. But they've just got too much stuff happening at that point for them to be able to think clearly. So we used to, against all of our, philosophies and things, rescue them completely. Just, in whatever way was practical in their situation, completely rescue them. So we did remove them as much as we possibly could from the situation. We made resources that, yes, they should have made themselves, that, yes, that was their job. And we did lots of stuff that really technically was their job, which was our way of rescuing them, just to give them a bit of space to just be, so that then we could, start to build the skills and give them the space to even think about a strategy, like how do you give feedback, or,
I actually think that's a nice metaphor for how you support traumatized kids as well. We've been talking about self-regulation, things like that, not in depth, but often one of the things you have to do for a child who's just so overwhelmed is just be able to sit next to them and just pat their back, or, like touch them on the shoulder or something, which is what we call sort of external regulation, that they can't, you can't even talk and they can't self-regulate, they can't co-regulate in terms of talking to a teacher that they trust. Sometimes you just need that external regulation, much like you would with a little baby who's crying. You pick them up and you give them, little pats. And in a way, that's sort of, it sounds to me, Kay, that's sort of the parallels for what you're doing with the teacher, isn't it? That you're not going to always and continuously keep doing that for them, but you're doing that enough so that they're sort of regulated enough so that they have some space to start to contemplate about how they can do this for themselves. Because if you don't do that, it just feels like another person there who's punishing them or standing there judging them.
And they don't have the capacity to implement anything you tell them with integrity.
Yeah.
They've got the ability to do it because you've seen them do it before. But at the point where they are with this child, they lose that capacity and that skill to actually do what you've asked them with any clarity, and then it becomes like the child with trauma, that vicious cycle of failure on their part. And you basically just have to rescue and like they're a little person, and just hold them tightly and hug them and do things for them until they work their way back to, I guess, their capability that they had in a less stressed state.
Right.
And that's truly what working in a trauma-informed way really is. And, Esther, I was thinking about some of the stuff that you have that, just like the trauma can have this ripple effect across lots of different people, it works the other way too. So, every interaction you have with every person in that system is one that is therapeutic. So if you took the time out to speak to this teacher just calmly, or just were there while, they had a bit of a cry, or a bit of a sort of, whinge about how that's a therapeutic interaction. And in fact, you are being of service to the student because you've regulated a teacher who's now, capable and is accessing some of his or her wisdom in terms of their interaction. And you've actually modeled to the teacher a level of patience and trust building that they will then hopefully carry with them to their interactions with the students. So the ripple effect works the other way as well, I think, with trauma-informed practice. So that kind of feels like a nice sort of place to wrap up, if that's okay with you, Esther. Did you have any final questions or thoughts before we finish?
No, I think that we covered that well. I am encouraged when I think about teachers and thinking about them in the triangle as well. When they're in the red zone, we cannot expect them to be able to do what we would expect them to do in the green zone.
No.
And so being able to help them to have emotional and environmental safety, and that relational safety is all part of the systemic kind of atmosphere that we need to address with staff as well.
And it sounds like you and your staff are doing some great work there with helping teachers. I think it's such a great resource. It's a shame Kay and the team she had, a lot of that kind of infrastructure has dissipated from where we are here, but it's good to hear that it's going strong where you are at, Esther. So thank you for your work. I'm sure it's not easy pushing on every day. And I don't know how many people say thanks to you, but thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. And it would be great to keep in touch, and we'd love to hear more about your successes and the work you're doing there, and kind of building up this community of practice that we have.
I would love that. We could have some ongoing conversations. That would be great, to talk about share resources and move forward. That'd be wonderful.
It would be.
Sounds really exciting. Thank you, Esther.
Thank you. Take care of yourself.
Thank you. Yeah, take care.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.
That was a teacher coaching call as part of our TIPBS program. If you would like to book in for a coaching call for yourself, visit www.tipbs.com and register your details. Thank you for listening. See you next time.